Okay, so have you ever heard about winning a really high-stakes game, not just once, but like over and over? But the whole time, you're keeping this huge ESIC.
It sounds like a movie plot, right? But today on the deep dive, we're going to explore a story that kind of has that vibe.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Kiyu Mars.
And I'm Tanaz.
We're so glad you could join us as we explore this fascinating story from, well, you guessed it, Persian folklore.
And as always, we're going to be diving deep into the nuances, the symbolism, and all those layers that make these stories so captivating.
Yeah, and if you're new to our show, we're Iranian Things, and we've been doing this for a while now. This is actually, believe it or not, our 130th deep dive.
That's right. We focus on the, I guess you could say, the less explored corners of Iranian culture, delving into folklore, mythology, even a bit of cryptozoology every now and then.
And today, we're tackling a tale that's just jam-packed with cleverness, resilience, and, well, a bit of deception, too.
And there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to be looking at the moral lessons, the symbols, and really trying to understand why this particular story has resonated for, well, probably centuries.
So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, well, welcome back. We really appreciate your support. And if you're enjoying what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a comment, and giving us a like. It really does help us out and allows us to keep bringing you these deep dives. But now let's get into this fascinating story. It all starts with a king who's described as just, who is out on a hunt.
Right, and during this hunt, he comes across a shepherd's encampment, and there he sees the shepherd's daughter, who's described as incredibly beautiful. She's at the entrance of her tent, and the king is immediately captivated.
Now, it's important to note that the story emphasizes the king's justice right from the beginning. So you'd think, with this emphasis on justice, his actions would align with, ethical behavior.
You'd assume so, right? But this sets up an interesting tension as we see how he interacts with the shepherd's daughter. So he approaches her politely and asks for some water, which, she offers courteously. It's a brief interaction, but it kind of sets the stage for what's to come.
Right. Even though he's the king, he doesn't just demand the water, he asks for it. It suggests a certain level of respect, or at least, an attempt to appear respectful.
Absolutely. Especially in a time where, a king could essentially take whatever he wanted. This gesture of asking rather than demanding suggests that maybe his interest in her is, well, a bit more genuine.
Now, instead of, resorting to force, which he clearly had the power to do, the king returns to his camp, and he can't stop thinking about the shepherd's daughter. He tells his vizier about her.
And the vizier the vizier suggests they just send soldiers to bring her back to the king. But the king insists that he wants her to come willingly.
Yeah, he's very adamant about that. He doesn't just want to possess her. He wants her to choose him. Why do you think that distinction is so important to him?
Well, I think it adds a layer of complexity to his character. Maybe it's a genuine desire for connection, even within, the constraints of a royal marriage.
Or maybe, and this is just a thought, maybe he understands that a willing partner would be less likely to cause any kind of trouble or unrest in the kingdom.
It's a fascinating point. So the king sends his vizier to the shepherd to formally ask for his daughter's hand in marriage.
Now, you'd think that a shepherd, being offered such a thing by the king, would immediately jump at the opportunity. But that's not what happens at all.
Not even close.
Right.
The shepherd, instead of being, overjoyed, is actually furious. He flat out refuses and even insults the vizier, which is, well, pretty audacious, to say the least.
It's a real slap in the face to the king's authority. And it raises the question, was this kind of defiance common? Would someone in the shepherd's position dare to refuse a royal request so forcefully?
It really disrupts the typical power dynamic we'd expect. It suggests that the shepherd is fiercely independent, or maybe deeply distrustful of the monarchy. Maybe he's just incredibly protective of his daughter and doesn't want her swept up in the complexities of court life.
It's a powerful statement. And the vizier, obviously not happy about being insulted, returns to the king with the bad news.
And the king, despite this setback, reaffirms his desire. He says, I want the shepherd to agree willingly. I need his consent. It's not enough to simply bring the daughter to him. He needs the father's blessing.
Yeah, he's really fixated on this idea of genuine consent, which I have to admit is a bit surprising given the power dynamics at play.
This is where the vizier comes up with a really clever plan. He realizes that a direct approach isn't going to work. So he suggests finding someone who's like the shepherd to negotiate with him.
Someone who can relate to him, understand his values, speak his language. It's actually a pretty smart move. It shows an understanding that different people respond to different forms of persuasion.
Absolutely. So they find a relative of the shepherd and task him with convincing the shepherd to agree to the marriage.
And this relative's approach is fascinating. He doesn't appeal to, loyalty to the king or anything like that. He appeals to the shepherd's self-interest.
It's a very practical, down-to-earth argument. He basically says, look, why were you so rude to the vizier? If your daughter marries the king, think of all the benefits. We'll be able to graze our sheep on the best land without paying any fees. Our whole family will prosper.
It's pretty manipulative, honestly.
Yeah.
But it plays on the shepherd's concerns and priorities. It completely bypasses the romantic aspects of a royal marriage and focuses on tangible gains.
And for the shepherd, this approach works wonders. He immediately regrets his previous outbursts and wishes he had spoken to someone like his relative in the first place. It's amazing how quickly his attitude changes when his own interests are involved.
Right. It really highlights the power of appealing to someone's self-interest, even if the means are a bit questionable. So the shepherd agrees to the marriage, all thanks to this, well, let's call it persuasive relative.
But the king, even with the shepherd's consent, isn't quite ready to proceed. He decides he wants to test the daughter's intelligence.
He's not just looking for a beautiful wife. He wants a clever and resourceful queen. So he sets 3 seemingly impossible tasks for her to complete.
He demands that she bring him something cooked and something uncooked, something spun and something unspun, and something woven and something unwoven. It sounds like something out of a riddle. How could anyone possibly fulfill those requests?
They seem completely paradoxical. But remember, this is a story about cleverness and overcoming obstacles. And to deliver these demands, the king sends his vizier back to the shepherd.
And on his way to the shepherd's home, the vizier does something really strange. He asks the shepherd 2 bizarre questions. Will you become a ladder, or shall I? And later, will you become a bridge, or shall I?
The shepherd is completely baffled. He has absolutely no idea what the vizier is talking about. It seems like the vizier is speaking in riddles.
The shepherd's confusion is understandable. These questions seem completely out of context. Maybe the vizier is trying to gauge the shepherd's intelligence, or maybe it's just a reflection of his own courtly and somewhat cryptic way of speaking.
Regardless, the shepherd, completely bewildered, tells his daughter about this encounter with the king's strange envoy and repeats the vizier's nonsensical questions.
And this is where the daughter's intelligence shines through. Unlike her father, she immediately understands the hidden meaning behind the vizier's words.
She explains that ladder refers to conversation. The vizier is essentially asking, shall we talk to make the journey seem shorter? And bridge refers to being carried across the river. He's asking, will you carry me or shall I carry you?
Her ability to decipher the vizier's riddles demonstrates her quick wit and her understanding of the nuances of language. She proves that she's not just beautiful, but also incredibly sharp.
And then she learns about the king's seemingly impossible tasks. But instead of panicking, she sets about devising ingenious solutions. She understands that she needs to think outside the box, beyond the literal interpretations of the king's demands.
For the cooked and uncooked request, she slaughters a sheep and presents 1 cooked testicle and 1 uncooked one. It's a bit of a, well, let's just say a very specific solution, but it undeniably meets the criteria.
It's bold and creative. It shows she's resourceful and willing to push boundaries. For the spun and unspun requirement, she takes some wool, spins half of it into thread, and leaves the other half in its raw, unspun state. Again, a simple but clever solution.
And for the woven and unwoven, she weaves half a belt, leaving the other half unwoven. She consistently demonstrates this ability to find a middle ground, a clever way to fulfill the king's contradictory demands.
She then arranges all these items on a tray, covers it with a silk cloth, and sends it back to the king with the vizier. But she doesn't stop there. She also prepares a delicious meal decorated with wildflowers and sends that along too.
This extra gesture is significant. It shows that she's not just trying to pass a test. She's demonstrating thoughtfulness, generosity, and attention to detail.
It's a way of showcasing her character, her qualities, beyond just pure intellect. The king, upon receiving the items and hearing about her interpretations of the vizier's riddles, is deeply impressed.
He recognizes her intelligence, her wit, and her resourcefulness. He's clearly smitten, and so he decides to hold the wedding right there in the desert.
It's a bit unconventional, holding a royal wedding in such a setting. Maybe he's eager to solidify the union with someone who's clearly so exceptional.
But then, on the wedding night, something unexpected happens. The king doesn't consummate the marriage. He actually stays away from her for several days.
It's a curious twist. Is he still testing her in some way? Is he hesitant? Is there something else going on? It adds a layer of intrigue to the story.
Finally, the king summons her and presents her with a sealed box filled with jewels. He gives it back to her with a very peculiar set of instructions. He tells her that when he returns in a year, the sealed box must contain stones, but the seal must remain unbroken. She must have borne his child. His mare must be pregnant by his stallion, which he's taking with him, and his female slave must be pregnant by his male slave, whom he's also taking.
These conditions seem absolutely impossible. It's like he's setting her up for failure.
They're incredibly challenging. It's almost as if he's testing her to the absolute limit, and he makes it very clear. If she fails to meet these conditions, she'll be expelled from the palace without a dowry. It's a huge risk he's asking her to take.
And to everyone's surprise, she agrees. Maybe she's confident in her ability to find a way, or maybe she feels like she has no other choice. Regardless, it shows incredible courage and a willingness to face seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Now, this is where the story takes a truly fascinating turn. The daughter, instead of passively waiting for the year to pass, decides to take matters into her own hands. She disguises herself as a man.
This disguise is crucial. It allows her to move freely and act with a level of authority that wouldn't be possible as a woman in that society. It's a clever way to assert her agency and control the situation.
She gathers the king's mare, the female slave, and the sealed box of jewels. She assembles a group of riders and sets off on a journey, deliberately taking a less direct route until she finds a lush hunting ground where she establishes a camp.
She's not just reacting, she's being proactive. She's planning and strategizing, taking control of her destiny. And as luck would have it, the king eventually arrives at the same hunting ground with his entourage.
He sees this unexpected encampment and, intrigued, sends his vizier to investigate. The guards report that the camp belongs to the son of the king of the West, who's there for hunting. This fabricated identity is the first step in the daughter's elaborate plan.
The vizier, completely fooled by the disguise, requests an audience with this young man. And he finds the daughter, dressed as a man, sitting on an emerald throne. It's a striking image, one that conveys both power and deception.
The vizier, unaware of the truth, invites the young man to be the king's guest. And the daughter, maintaining her disguise, accepts the invitation and arrives at the king's camp with her veiled attendants.
That evening, chessboards are brought out. And these chess games become the stage for the daughter's brilliant and somewhat manipulative plan.
The first game is a high-stakes one. The king's horse against the young man's mare, and the young man, of course, wins. The king, being honorable, sends his prize horse over to the young man's camp.
But the daughter, remember, is always one step ahead. That night, she secretly arranges for the young mare to be mated with the king's horse. The next morning, the king's horse is returned to him, seemingly unharmed.
The king sees this as an act of incredible generosity and sportsmanship. He has no idea that his horse has just, well, helped fulfill one of his impossible conditions.
The next night, they play again. This time, betting a female slave against a male slave. And once again, the young man wins.
The king sends his male slave over, and the daughter, predictably, orchestrates a similar situation, ensuring the female slave and the king's male slave spend the night together. The next morning, the male slave is returned to the king.
The king must be completely bewildered at this point. He keeps winning these valuable assets back, reinforcing his positive view of the young man. He has no idea that he's being outmaneuvered at every turn.
The third night, they raise the stakes even higher. The king wagers his personal seal against the young man's seal, and for the third time in a row, the young man wins.
Now, this is crucial. Having the king's seal allows the daughter to address the sealed box of jewels. That night, she opens the box, replaces the jewels with pebbles, and reseals it using the king's seal. The next morning, the seal is returned to the king.
The king is probably both impressed and confused by this point. He's consistently losing, but his winnings are always returned, seemingly out of pure honor and generosity.
For the final game, the stakes are different. The king wagers a Chinese slave girl, and the young man wagers a week's worth of tribute from his kingdom. And in a surprising twist, the young man deliberately loses.
This is a brilliant strategic move. By losing, the daughter ensures the king takes possession of the Chinese slave girl. And this sets the stage for the final act of her elaborate plan.
She removes her male disguise, dresses herself in exquisite Chinese silk, and has her veiled attendants present her to the king as the Chinese slave girl. It's the ultimate reveal.
The king, completely oblivious, is captivated by the slave girl's beauty and spends the night with her. In the morning, he sends her away with a dowry, completely unaware that he's just been tricked by his own wife.
The following day, the king and the young man spend time together hunting and fishing, as if nothing out of the ordinary has happened. That night, at the young man's suggestion, they camp by the river.
And while the king is none the wiser, the daughter instructs her companions to dismantle the camp after she and the king have moved a distance away.
Under the cover of darkness, the daughter and her veiled attendants ride off, taking a different route back to the city.
When the king wakes up the next morning, he finds the young man and the entire encampment gone. He's left to wonder about the mysterious and generous son of the king of the West.
The king continues his journey, and a year later, he finally returns to his palace. To his astonishment, he finds a baby in a cradle, his mare is pregnant, and his female slave has also given birth.
3 out of the 4 seemingly impossible conditions have been met. The daughter then presents him with the sealed jewel box. The seal is unbroken, but when he opens it, it's filled with pebbles.
The king is utterly baffled. He demands to know how she managed to pull all of this off. And this is when she finally reveals the truth. She tells him, "Because in the desert you encountered the son of the king of the West and spent the nights playing chess."
The king is stunned. He finally realizes that the clever young man who outwitted him at chess was none other than his own wife, disguised to fulfill his impossible demands.
The story concludes with the king recognizing his wife's intelligence and resourcefulness. She becomes his respected queen, and they live happily ever after.
This story isn't just entertaining, it's thought-provoking. It makes us question our own assumptions about power, intelligence, and the ways in which individuals can navigate challenging situations.
Absolutely. The daughter's cleverness and strategic thinking are remarkable. It makes you wonder, how often do we underestimate the power of wit and planning in our own lives?
That's a great point. The story also raises questions about societal expectations and the lengths to which individuals, particularly women, might have to go to assert their agency and achieve their goals.
The daughter had to become someone else, adopt a different identity, to fulfill the king's demands and secure her place in the palace. It's a powerful commentary on the limitations imposed by societal norms and the ways in which individuals can subvert those norms.
What other interpretations might you have for this story? What do you think motivated the king's behavior? And what does the daughter's elaborate scheme tell us about her character? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to check out our playlist for more explorations of fascinating folklore and mythology. And before you go, consider this. What seemingly impossible challenges are you facing in your own life? And could the daughter's resourcefulness and strategic thinking offer any inspiration for tackling those challenges? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.